Welcome to Your Money Guides, brought to you by Interface Financial Planning.
Hello. Today we're going to talk about funeral planning, an emotive topic. And what an uplifting one it is, and one that Alan has covered before. But it's important to update these topics periodically, especially this one. The reason this came to Alan's mind was because yesterday morning he had to submit his application to the FCA to continue to be authorised to supply advice on funeral planning. While the first funeral plan he did was back in 1993 for his mother, the funeral planning concept has never been regulated. However, as of the 1st of September, anyone offering funeral planning advice must apply to the FCA. Over the years, there have been many IFAs and others selling funeral plans, but as it's been unregulated, they could pretty much charge anything they wanted, which has never been acceptable. Alan is delighted that the FCA has stepped in. It cost Alan a rather grand sum of £1,250 to submit his application. He was a little taken aback to see that sum leave his bank account in the morning, but nevertheless, as it's for something dear to his heart, he knows it's worth it. The paperwork alone was difficult to plough through, and it took 12 hours before he felt ready to submit the application. That's one reason why lots of IFAs aren't bothering to become officially authorised. The paperwork alone, and of course the price. People like to put off things that make them uncomfortable. But please don't ignore funeral planning, because the end is unfortunately inevitable. When Alan did his mother's funeral plan, she was relieved and glad. She died 10 years after it was put into place, and for the last 2 years of her life, she was in a care home, having suffered a stroke. So she never had to worry about her funeral, the costs associated, or not having what she wanted, because it was done. When she died, Alan's sister and him had first-hand experience in understanding why she was relieved it was all sewn up beforehand. Up to now, funeral plans have paid the advisors or will writers or whoever was processing the plan commission. Over the last few years, the funeral plan advisors have chased business and commissions crept upwards. Alan saw a plan earlier this year that paid £900 commission out of a funeral plan that might cost £3,500. That comes out of the value of what's been provided and the cost to the applicant. It's disproportionate, and that's why the FCA has banned commission on funeral plans, thankfully. Having said that, last Friday, Alan was talking to a funeral plan advisor, and he said the FCA was going to wreck the funeral plan market because of the no commission. He said that to Alan, what the only way of making money now from funeral plans is by charging a fee, and most people aren't going to want to pay a fee. Well, quite honestly, Alan has a different view. Alan feels that funeral planning is an important part of his holistic financial advice. He would happily do it for nothing for his clients. However, within the context of estate planning, the cost of funeral planning can be incorporated into an overall fee. Estate planning for Alan is part of funeral planning, as it's also about making sure your assets are arranged properly, which he'll come back to in this piece. It's about passing things to your beneficiaries. It's about inheritance tax planning. What is known as estate planning? It's planning for the time of death, when we pass on to wherever we end up. Alan came across a case recently where he had a client who refused to do estate planning. Her husband had left her 20 years previously, quite literally disappeared. The couple had 2 daughters. When the lady in question died, she had cancer and was ill for several months. Her estranged husband turned up. He took the house. The wife had assumed her house would go to her daughters, but as the house was still joint tenants, it went to him, and her daughters didn't get a penny. Let that be a warning. Estate planning is part of funeral planning. Trust Alan. Ask yourself if your property has been handled correctly. Here's another example. A couple who had been together 30 years had the house in her name. She died and he had no right to live in the property, even though he had lived there for 30 years, Because, under the laws of intestacy, he didn't inherit anything and it all went to their daughter instead. Don't just assume everything passes on upon the moment of death. It doesn't. There are laws in place and you must plan everything efficiently. Back to funeral planning. Alan had a girl who worked for him over 20 years ago. She had an unwell brother in his mid-40s who couldn't work and was on benefits. When he died, the local authority came to her, as the sister, to pay for the funeral. You assume the local authority will pay, but they go to the nearest next of kin. They delivered a bill to her with payment due within a month. Funeral planning is really important. It affects all sorts of people, whether poor or rich. If Alan is investing £1 million for a client, he will put £3,500 to £4,000 into a funeral plan, because the plans increase every year by approximately 7%. If that 7% rise continues, it's a good investment in Alan's book. It's not just about investment. It's also about having everything in place for those you leave behind. Alan had a client who died in December 2019, who'd lived alone, but he'd put his funeral plan in place. His friends called Alan upon his death, so it took just one phone call by Alan to the funeral director, and he told his friends that everything was arranged. It happened like clockwork. Funeral planning takes a lot of extra stress away from the bereaved. It's a relief to find everything's been organised and makes the process of burying a loved one simpler too. This may not be everyone's favourite topic, but it's important nonetheless. So please, do get in touch with Alan and his team if you want to start funeral planning. Thank you for listening.
For more information, visit our website at interfacefinancialplanning.co.uk.